Welcome to the Marshall Pruett podcast and our Inside the Sports Car interview series presented by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers. It is race week at Sebring, and I am so happy. So for this episode, we have something that I think you might be interested in to start off, as is our new tradition with Supreme race engineer Jeff Braun, truly old friend, someone I have known. I worked with Jeff the first time back in 1991. He was a race engineer on an Atlantic team that I worked on. I was one of the dumb mechanics that he put up with, but thankfully he has decided to maintain our friendship all these decades. But it's so awesome that Jeff is making time for us every week to reveal engineering items, technical items. I did follow in his footsteps to become a race engineer and just love continuing to sit at his feet in a proverbial sense and listen to his insights, and also get to talk about some things that I know about too. But really I just try and be the person serving up the questions here and listen to Jeff explain cutting edge items like today's topic, which is data monitoring in the race by the sanctioning body. So if we think of balance of performance, we think of tuning and calibrations and telemetry and all kinds of things done to look at and monitor how each car is performing. In this instance, in the WeatherTech Sports Car Championship, also have the World Endurance Championship here this weekend in Sebring. But if we think about those cars competing in their events, in some cases the mindset might be, oh well, hey, you go through all of that. The series really is the big kind of eye in the sky, snooping and whatnot, looking in on what you're doing, coming into the race. But once the race actually starts, well, then it's a free-for-all. And in reality, that is 100% not the case, as Jeff explains. IMSA is still monitoring everything. So he dives into what they're looking for, some of the notes that he's gotten back from the series saying, hey, beware of this, or rectify that quickly. Gets into lambda settings, another area where you might have heard that name mentioned, but possibility you might not know what lambda means in the context of racing data monitoring and compliance. So we get into that, and then we move into our second interview, and that's with Chris Dyson, who finished third in one of the Trans Am races at Sebring a little over a week ago. We're actually hoping to have Chris on for last week's show, but travel issues did not make that possible. So caught up with Chris, talking about the Trans Am season opener. I am a just lifelong fan of Trans Am, so I'm so happy to see this mini resurgence taking place, and Chris brings us inside that. Then we move on to Rob Bell and our pal Graham Goodwin, my co-host for the Week in Sports Cars. Graham turned up for the British GT Media Day and sat down with McLaren factory development driver Rob Bell, spoke about the new McLaren 720S GT3, and then we move into Graham's second and final interview, and that's with Multimatic's Scott Maxwell, the super awesome Canadian, to speak about the drive and what they have going on with their Mustang GT4 chassis, that being a Multimatic product, of course, that is being used, that's been seen in the British GT Championship, will also be used and available across Europe. So start off with Jeff Braun, move into Chris Dyson, then pick up with Rob Bell, and close with Scott Maxwell in the Sebring edition of Inside the Sports Car Paddock, brought to you by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers. This party just keeps on rolling, Jeff Braun. It is the we're going to make you smarter whether you like it or not, or fill in things you might not have known about sports car racing, all courtesy of our dear pal Jeff Braun from the Core Autosport team. And I try not to repeat this too often, but one of the great joys of my life is having met you in, I think, 1991, when you were the engineer on the somewhat small but aspirational Toyota Atlantic team that I was working on, and it was just pretty cool meeting you back then when your kids were not even knee-high yet, but just cool to have this very long friendship with someone who's been at the head of his professional industry. And while I was a race engineer for many years, always was looking up to a certain Jeff Braun, among others, wanting to be as good as them. So kind of fun later in life here that as an old washed-up engineer, we can at least plug in with a really good modern one and get smarter. And today's topic, my friend, kind of the interesting and almost, I don't want to say unspoken, but rarely acknowledged world of in-race BOP management. And this came in from a topic that a listener sent in to you.
Yep. Yeah, it's, I know from listening to all your podcasts that you only get to say BOP 3 times because it's usually comes up in a negative way, but we're probably going to say it more times in this discussion, but it's in a positive way. Love it, hate it, we're not going to debate that, but there it is. And as a race engineer, we have to deal with it. And I don't really care what once the weekend starts, I don't care what the BOP is or whether it's fair or not fair. It's just another set of parameters like tires and fuel and track conditions and drivers that I have to deal with and that I have to manage, and I try to manage as well as possible. IMSA, on the other hand, on the same hand, they have to manage it too. And their goal is to make sure that everything is fair, that the BOP that they set out for the weekend is maintained throughout the weekend, throughout every lap of the weekend, and that nobody circumvents the rules that are set out. So it's something that we have to manage, we have to look at, and and IMSA is doing the same thing. And it's really actually a pretty good working relationship between the teams and IMSA. Nobody wants to get penalized. IMSA doesn't really want to penalize anybody. They're not out to, get you. They want to make the racing good and the racing fair. And so they have various ways of managing that through the weekend when the cars aren't running and even when they're running.
And so the BOP that folks, I would say, are familiar with, the balance of performance, that's going to come in the form of a pre-race bulletin that says, hey, Jeff, on the Core Autosport Nissan on-road DPI, we are going to apply this boost table change that with Sebring here this week, we'll just say, for example, we've made a change to your boost. We have made a minimum weight change. We have possibly altered the maximum capacity of your fuel cell, made a couple of tweaks, all designed to make your Nissan DPI compete as equally, at least in terms of lap time or raceability, with the Acuras, the Cadillacs, and the Mazdas. We know that stuff. It's okay, but what happens when we get into the race? And we might see that, hopefully, not because a team has done anything to try and contravene the rules, but maybe we've seen, this car is performing outside the scope of expectations. What kind of tools does race control have to reach out to your team, any other team? I mean, this isn't limited to Prototype, but any other team, and say, hey, these are some of the things we're going to try and tweak on the fly, or at your next pit stop, we want you to plug in and do this, or we see that you aren't meeting this expected parameter. There's a number of things in there that I think folks might not be aware are really being actively monitored during the race in race control.
Yeah, that's, aside from the obvious things like at the end of the race, they'll weigh our car and check our weight to make sure it meets that rule and other things. We can talk about that kind of the static or post-race or post-practice checks that they do, which are kind of interesting. But as you point out, race control has a technical team in race control, and we talked a few episodes back about telemetry on our cars and being sent back to us in the pits, and how it's also sent to IMSA. So as the cars are circulating around during the race, IMSA is receiving via telemetry from each car a huge data stream. And in that data stream is all the things that they're interested in BOP. So for a turbocharged car, it's the boost pressure that we're running. It's the RPM. It's the fuel mixture setting. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But all those parameters are all sent back to IMSA, along with the normal things like speed and throttle position and engine RPM, and they even tap into our ride height sensors. And they have full, they have every sensor on the car that we can see, they can see. And so they're not going to use a ride height thing during the race, but they're looking at mainly during the race, your boost and your fuel mixture. Each team now, this is new for this year, has to declare a fuel mixture setting. And IMSA looks at that along with the boost. And because here's the thing, if we ran too high of boost for 10 laps and then brought it back down, that would be unfair to the competition, because we had 10 laps where we were essentially outside the BOP.
Yeah.
So IMSA needs to monitor that actively every lap. And if we get too high, and obviously environmental conditions change, fuel load change, things change. So the boost, you can't just set the boost at one level and it just maintains there. Lots of things change. So they actually use an integral rolling average of the boost, and it gets really complicated. There's a lot of math involved. But basically, if we go over the target boost too many times in a row, we get a message on instant message from race control through the technical department at IMSA saying you have to make this correction within one lap or you get a drive-through penalty or whatever penalty they deem necessary, but we're going to get penalized. And so then we have to we get that message. My engine calibration engineer who sits with me in the scoring stand will get the message, and he will recommend that we go down one knob position on boost and just reduce the boost. I call the driver, say go to position 2 on the boost. He clicks it down. IMSA sees that our boost has gone down. We're now running just under the maximum boost, and they're happy. And that has to happen quickly, otherwise we'll get penalized. The same thing with the fuel mixture. If you're outside your declared fuel mixture, too lean or too rich, we'll get a message like that.
And that's an interesting thing too, Jeff. We might stop and explain on the declared lambda setting, and that has somewhat recently been added into the public, or I shouldn't say public, but the official BOP tables that are dispatched. Those have been added somewhat recently for all to see. That's an interesting factor as well, because knowing that every team has a declared lambda setting, a fuel mixture target that you are expected to comply with, that takes away, it modifies a lot of things. How does this declared lambda BOP number, I'm looking at Sebring's BOP, yours is 0.86, Mazda's is 0.85, Cadillac's is 0.9, and Acura's is 0.89. So, Jeff, knowing that we have this declared lambda setting, which is now being observed by the eye in the sky and race control, you and every team are expected to meet and not exceed this declared lambda setting. Tell us how you monitor that throughout the race to make sure you're in compliance. Is that we're actively watching it, or we just got a note from IMSA, now we better take a look and see what's going on kind of thing? And also maybe share some thoughts on how this declared lambda expectation in BOP has actually fundamentally changed maybe what many fans think think might still be taking place in the cockpit in regards to fuel saving and how that gets done.
Right. So first of all, you're exactly right. It has changed it quite a bit. And just to make it simple on what lambda is, there's a sensor in the exhaust pipe that basically, it's an expensive sensor, and every street car has one, and we have them in the race car. It reads the fuel mixture. It reads the exhaust gas and reads how rich or lean the mixture was, and gives a number. So if people are really interested, they can go see how that number has come up and what that number means. But basically, it reads how rich or lean the engine's running. In the past, we had a knob on the steering wheel. People would always hear engine map, or if they're listening to IndyCar, they'll hear, go to map 6, go to map 2. And we have the same thing in sports car racing. We have different maps. And they're basically, the map is just a computer chart or program of the fuel versus RPM, how much fuel we're going to put in for this RPM and this torque level. And so it's a description, a computer program that tells the fuel injectors and the timing of the engine and all of the parameters that we can change what to do at different RPMs and different throttle position settings. And that produces the exhaust gas, obviously. The lambda sensor reads that exhaust gas and tells us how rich or lean it is. So in the past, we had this knob. You want to save fuel, you're 2 laps short of making it to the end on your of the race, you can tell the driver to lean the engine out with his map. The lambda reading changes, shows us, hey, we're leaner now. No big deal. We're going to run less power because you're putting less fuel in, so we have less power. But the race engineer and strategists have decided that it's better to run a little less power and avoid a pit stop than the other way around. Perfect. IMSA has taken that away from all the teams now, the ability to change the fuel mixture with a knob or with the computer control. Teams now have to declare a lambda reading. And there's a range, but we declare one reading. This is what we want to run. Okay? Then IMSA says you got to run that within a certain parameter, a certain, tolerance. So now nobody has this ability to change the mixture with a knob in the car. The only way we can save fuel is strictly by driver ability, by lifting off, short shifting, being light on the throttle, not using the throttle in the brake zones, all the things that make good fuel-saving drivers good fuel-saving drivers.
But the key point being, it's no longer a case of clickety-click-click on the steering wheel to achieve a certain fuel number. It's not an option. It is now down to the driver. And where I think this is interesting, and maybe you can add this into your insights as well, Jeff, just stepping out of sports cars for a moment, in IndyCar, Scott Dixon's been known for more than a decade as the fuel meister. He makes fuel. He's so amazing, and it's down to his driving style that he has developed to do this. This is something where IndyCar has also gone in this direction pretty heavily too, where drivers have had to learn how to do this because they can no longer rely on a fuel mixture knob to do it for them. That becomes a bit of a quick study thing for, I would say, many drivers in sports cars too, knowing that, hey, your average IndyCar race is an hour and 40 minutes long, hour and 50, great. Yeah, we're going to Sebring for 12 hours here in a couple days. All right, you're going to be in the car for a long time. This is a skill you're going to need to master and apply for a long time. I also think it's pretty interesting to see how, even though we've been racing sports cars forever, there's still new things drivers are having to pick up to do their job properly.
Right. Well, I'll try not to make this sound like I'm bragging on my kid, but Road America last year, we had an LMP2 car, which has no fuel mixture adjustment, unlike the DPI cars. So we were essentially running to this year's rules, where there's one lambda setting and we can't adjust it. It's not allowed in LMP2. The DPI cars we were racing against all had fuel adjustments that they could lean their car down. Road America became a fuel savings race. It was a fuel race. Whoever could make it to the end was going to win. Colin was able to save an amazing amount of fuel with no adjustment in the car, racing against all the other drivers who had an adjustment in the car and may have been more reliant on that because they had that option in the past and hadn't practiced. They're all good. They all can do it, but they may not have practiced their fuel-saving skills from a driving standpoint because they had the luxury of the knob to do it. And here you needed, probably to win this race, you needed either an amazing ability to do it or a combination of both. And so, Colin said, hey, you drive for 4 years in NASCAR for Jack Roush, and if you can't save fuel, you won't last 1 year there.
I love it.
And so he learned a lot of fuel saving from driving for Roush in NASCAR, and it paid off there. So now this year, everybody's going to have to do that. And I think you're right. The drivers are going to, they're all good at it. They're just going to have to deploy it now where they haven't had the need to in the past with the ability to adjust that. But IMSA will be looking at that and make sure that we're not using some trick to lean the engine out, because we have to hit that declared lambda. And if we are not within the tolerance, we'll get the same kind of message we would if our boost is too high, and we got to fix it right now. And our engine calibration people, that's what they look at. They stare at a computer screen for the whole race, looking at boost values and lambda values and making sure that we're in compliance.
Trying to out-strategize the other teams, trying to be crafty in traffic, trying to set the quickest possible pit stops, trying to be as efficient as possible on tires, also having to go through driver rotations, pick the certain strengths of certain drivers, whether it's night, day, or otherwise, weave in and out of 40, 50 other cars, and also, I don't know if worry is the word, maybe it is, but worry about what's the principal seeing? Someone's
right.
looking over my shoulder while we're taking this test the whole time. They see my real-time answers, all the math I'm coming up with to try and do this trigonometry test. Man, I sure hope I don't get popped for getting the taking the test portion wrong, much less the final grade at the end. It's just, again, I love the fact that this was raised as a topic, because it just, I think for the most part, even I forget at times that, oh no, you are being watched every corner, you are always being surveilled, and if anything is seen as being, out of compliance, they don't just wait till after the race. Oh, yeah, we're gonna dock you 5 seconds or move you back. Nope. There are corrective measures to be taken in many instances while the race is going on. So,
exactly. Even fuel, maybe it's probably another topic for another day, but they monitor our fuel flow rate, how fast the fuel goes into the car, how much fuel goes into the car, and there's very strict restrictions on how fast we can fill our car. And it's not just a restrictor in the fuel hose. They actually time the fuel flow into each car during the race, and if you're going to do 40 pit stops at Daytona, it's not like they'll let you do 38 of them too fast and then you can fix it for the last 2 and you were legal. No, you can get docked from the very first pit stop if you're fueling your car too fast. And we're not. I want to make sure everybody understands that all the race engineers, my friends that I talk to on other teams, it's 2%. How can I find a way to optimize the rule? And it's 98%. How can I find a way to not just blow it and get caught? Caught's not the right word. Be found out of compliance. It's like that 4 and 6 rule we talked about. Your fear is, I missed something and I didn't meet the rule. You're not trying to cheat the rule. You're not trying to pull something over IMSA's eyes. They work really good with us, really well together with all the teams, and the teams pretty much work to try to comply with the rules. But it's so complex now that you can put your best efforts in to comply with the rules. You're not trying to cheat or anything. You're trying to comply, and you still miss it. And that's the fear, is that, okay, I tried to make the 4 and 6 rule. I tried to fill it at the right time. I tried to get the right lambda setting. And I really did, and I missed it, and IMSA's on my case because I'm struggling because I've got an air leak in my intake, and now my land is off because of my air leak. Do I have to stop and fix the air leak, or can I run it this way? And you're just trying to make it work right, and there's so much going on that you almost don't have time to figure out how you can cheat a rule. You're just trying to comply with the rule that they have. And I'm not saying there's too many rules. It's what it is, and it has to be that way to be fair. But it's changed the race engineers' workload and focus.
Smarter we are, thanks to you, Mr. Braun. Well, I'm hoping that you and your Nissan team have an excellent Mobil 1 12 Hours of Sebring.
Thank you, sir.
Know that you all have fun playing the role of spoiler to the big factories, knowing that you guys are indeed a independent team that that hires Nissan to supply, compared to having the full might of Nissan behind you as a factory. So, yeah, for those in search of a David to play with and hopefully disappoint some of the Goliaths, at least in the prototype category in DPI, we do have our good pals at Core Autosport and our pal Mr. Braun. So, Jeff, as always, thank you, my friend. And the fun part about this is we have no idea what the topic will be next week, so we look to you, dear listeners. You can either reach out to Jeff on social media, usually via Twitter, or myself via Twitter or Facebook. And if you have technical things, engineering-related items, whatever it might be on that side of the sport, just let us know. And we are adding to a list that continues to grow of fun things to get into here to open up the Inside the Sports Car Paddock show.
Absolutely. It's been, I think every question we've hit since the second show has been given to us from, social media. So, we'll talk about what other people like to hear, and turns out we like talking about it too. So I appreciate it, Marshall. It's always fun.
Chris Dyson, I was very jealous of you last weekend. Warmth in Florida, while our friends at Circuit of the Americas were certainly bundled up trying to stay warm, but Florida, genuine flame-breathing Trans Am cars for the season opener there. You in your plaid Mustang. I love that sponsorship, by the way. I figured who better to catch up with than someone who has a shared lifelong passion for Trans Am racing. And knowing that you've been competing in the series for a little while now, its modern version, wanted to check and see how the opening weekend went from your standpoint, and maybe then to get into some thoughts on where it might be headed, if we might be on the road to its former importance in North America. So let's just start with your weekend and what you saw there.
Well, Marshall, it's great to talk with you again. And you're right. I've been a fan of Trans Am since I was a kid. I actually, in the early 90s, we were looking at it as kind of potentially a place where I was going to race, really as a young kid. And we didn't ultimately pursue that path, but I never lost the interest in wanting to go and sample these cars. And I finally got a chance a couple of years ago. David Paddock, who's a good friend, asked me to come up to Watkins Glen, and I was blown away. And we had a great year last year, learned a lot, and we're in contention at a lot of the events. And I think Sebring was a good starting point for us. I think we've got a little bit of a gap to make up to the Burton racing guys at this point. Lawrence Loshak drove a great race, and I think that, if we'd had longer runs, I think over longer runs we were good. We just had these untimely yellows, and he was a bit quicker on the restarts and was able to pull some gaps. But Sebring was very good, decent car count, a lot of quality at the top end. Nice to see a few returnees to the series that who have been there before, and I think that bring good entries. And of course, there's you've got guys like Ernie Francis and Lawrence Loshak and Tommy Dreese, among others up there, and a lot of these guys with a lot of experience, and we go out and we race these things, and they run hard, and we run all out, and you got to look after these things because they're monster cars.
Rafa Matos won round 1 on Saturday. As you mentioned, Loshak won on Sunday. You were on the podium there. What can you share with folks, Chris, who might be either shocked to learn that Trans Am still exists, or B, might have heard that it's been ticking over. It's been there in recent years, but definitely not what it once was in terms of just bigger national profile. Obviously, our friend Tony Perella, the SVRA team, I mean, there's a lot of good folks who've invested in this and are trying to make it a big thing again. What, for folks who haven't been super tuned in or aware that it's on a road to restoration, what's taken place there? What kind of cars are still being used? I know that I get lost a little bit in some of the class name designations and such, but as a guy who's been in that paddock pretty heavily, what can you tell us about where it's at in 2019?
Well, I think it's an exciting series. I mean, the racing is extremely good, top to bottom, and the cars are thunderous. I mean, there's no other way to put it other than that the TA1 cars are ground pounding, just fire breathing dragons, unapologetic, unapologetically fast, brutal, not a lot of the niceties that you're going to see in other formula. Certainly, no traction control, actually have to change gears. And, that's the case for the TA2 cars, which Rafa won in last weekend in pretty fine style. There's a pretty good depth of quality of the teams. The cars are pretty close from a parity perspective. I think that actually, in terms of getting into the series, it's easy to get your hands on available equipment. You have a choice in TA1 of Ford, GM, and Dodge offerings, yes, and body styles, and the cars themselves are, I think the bona fides and the DNA go back. Really, the current generation cars go back over 20 some odd years. And there's been some evolution. I think that's to Trans Am's credit that they've been able to keep a consistent rule package while still updating the body shapes, the body rules. Last year we were in the series. They allowed some underfloors and some higher efficiency wings, all in the name of making the cars a really, really high performance category of racing in this country for sprint racing. And I think that Trans Am's got a great niche. You mentioned Tony Perella. He's done a phenomenal job as far as fusing the SVRA offerings with Trans Am into what he's calling the Speed Fest. And the Speed Fest concept is being exported all around the country. And I'm excited because it means we get to go to great venues. I mean, we've got 11 races on our calendar, and there's not a dud venue on the list. These are prestigious places that any road racing fan would love to come and see these cars run for the first time. If they haven't seen them in a long time, this is exactly what was racing, in what some might consider the heyday. Certainly when I was younger, you and I in the 90s, looked at Trans Am and said, wow, that's amazing. I think it's getting back there. And, we talk about that now that, the top 5 in the series, to be up there battling, it's you gotta roll your sleeves up. And it's been fun for me because I'd been out of road racing for a couple of years, and I've really enjoyed coming back and having an opportunity to drive these cars in an era, really, Marshall, when cars are really being emasculated. I mean, racing every week is being emasculated, and what I enjoy the most about Trans Am is that it's pushing back, and it's embracing the heritage and the past, and not putting on any pretenses. And from a racer standpoint, and just from a performance standpoint, it's exciting. Yeah, it's visceral. The cars are visually fast. They accelerate like nobody's business, and the braking distances are long enough that you can set somebody up and make a good pass. There's no ABS, so as a driver, there's a lot to do, and that's, I think, a central appeal for me.
One thing that I find interesting, Chris, and I'm curious if you and I share a similar belief. So when I think about modern sports car racing, endurance racing, even sprint racing, you're going to find your homologated production-based GT3 cars, right? That's a big global imprint. for all manner of GT3 style cars. Those cars have every possible driver aid, so that's great for them. We have GT Le Mans / GTE, which is same production based, actually taking away some of those driver aids, but a very unique format there. Then we have prototypes, carbon fiber built chassis, and really, I guess you could say, almost from scratch, just make it up and conform to something that has no attachment to the road whatsoever. That's really been what's emerged, what has survived in the world of sports car racing. The thing that I have found interesting, and I don't know where you fall on this, is Trans Am lives in a space that was once normal, but is now extremely rare in the fact that we're talking about tube frame chassis. So silhouette cars, extreme, stretched, fantasy-looking supercars, GT-type cars, but they are not production-based. They are made from tubes and you name it, cut and welded in specialist racing shops. They've got composite bodies and such. They're extremely light, big cartoonish engines, big cartoonish tires, and so on. The silhouette racing thing that you and I grew up with, we would find in IMSA, GTO, GTU. Truly, yeah, it looks like the car a little bit on the outside, but trust me, this wasn't a body in white. This has never seen the inside of a production plant. Almost seems like time has either forgotten silhouette racing or said, no, that's not the way. I've even read a number of folks who think silhouette racing, these tube frame Trans Am type cars, they're not real sports cars. Where do you fall on that?
Marshall, it's a great topic. I mean, I don't know if it's something that really could require a lot of discussion. I think that you're right. I mean, you and I are of a generation that got to see the transition from, I think, in a lot of the olden era, where cars had more grip, cars had more power than grip, and a big part of the driver's sort of responsibility was harnessing the beast, taming the beast. And for whatever reason, for the last 25 odd years, the idea of harnessing performance and taking horsepower away has been kind of celebrated as a means of reducing, speeds. But what's happened in that meantime is downforce has gone up. Tires have gotten incredibly good. And I got to experience a lot of it in IMSA and in ALMS racing, in my career racing prototypes. The horsepower went down, but the tire performance went up, and so did the downforce. So you end up having cars that are just phenomenal in cornering. And I think this passes down to the GT categories that we see today. I think the proposition of driving changes, though. And I think that the way you manage a car during a race changes considerably. And James Weaver and I used to have these conversations a lot about sort of GTP versus latter-day LMP, just how different the driving approach had to be. And it's not to say it's better, but it's just different. I mean, I think for me at this point in my career, I'm just thrilled to be able to experience once again, the idea of an unbridled machine underneath me. And I think that I'm also fortunate right now that I'm able to do some circle track racing where I'm driving sprint cars and having to harness the car and sort of manage the performance with your foot. And, without the computers there to save you, to me, I found it pretty liberating. And to your point, I think it's like music. Music has become very overproduced. Sometimes it's nice just to plug the amp in and just hammer it and, go, strip out all the producers and the niceties and celebrate what's raw about racing and what's emotional about it. And I don't think there's very many cars right now that do that quite like a TA1 car does.
Let's close on this, Chris, because it is so unique. It's such a Dyson thing. So, throughout your career, you have raced Atlantic cars. You have been, as you mentioned, all manner of prototypes, obviously a champion in prototypes. You've raced in Grand Am, American Le Mans Series. You've been to the 24 Hours of Le Mans. You've done World Challenge. You've done all kinds of things. Someone who's still young, like yourself, and very accomplished, some might think, well, we'll just keep doing more of those things. That's been the familiar pattern. Off you go, retire when you're 50 or whatever, and who knows, maybe there's a third generation of Dyson who will be driving. I love the fact that you've said, you know what, I have done all those things, and those things were fun. And guess what? I'm going to the dirt. I'm going to climb in sprint cars and midgets and just chuck things sideways and see how I can learn, but also find out, test myself against the world's greatest short track drivers in these brutal, completely analog cars. And instead of just doing that, and I guess I'm fawning a little bit here, but I do love it, instead of doing that, saying, all right, that was fun, now let me get back to the same GT3-based World Challenge thing, or LMP2, whatever, he said, no, let me continue the Dyson tour and climb into more or less the last true, unfiltered, nasty, try and kill you if it could type road racing machine, that being a TA1 tube frame, 800 horsepower, oh my goodness, no driver aids whatsoever type road racing machine. What was it about these decisions, Chris? Because you've chosen the two most non-linear things for one's racing career or enjoyment, but they both tick the same box, just one on pavement, one on dirt.
Well, Marshall, it's actually kind of funny. I don't think it's by design or calculation, but I think it's more just the fact that I think it's about pushing boundaries. I think racing has to perpetually be fresh, at least for me it does, and it has to feel like you're pushing yourself and that you're being pushed to achieve. And I'm not saying that any of the other categories I've done in my career haven't done that. I mean, far from it. Just circumstances changed. Programs that we'd had a lot of time in, ran their course. And in I guess my search for the next frontier, I had been doing some oval racing during our World Challenge program, and I was becoming progressively more and more enmeshed in it and enjoying it very much. And I think I've just expanded that now to enjoy champ car racing, and I'm very excited this year because we're going to be doing not only just the dirt 100-mile races, but we're also be doing some pavement races. We'll be at Memphis in a couple of weeks, and it's turned out to be a great program because between that and running the Trans Am, I feel like I'm in two of the most historic series that have ever raced, and it's something that I think, when I looked at kind of my checklist of series that I wanted to do, were two things that were always on the list, and to be able to be doing them at the same time. And like you said, while I guess I'm still relatively young, although I think some people might debate that, it's a real privilege for me right now. And I consider myself very lucky to have been able to do this. And, there was a time a couple years ago where I'd been racing for 15 years straight, and I wasn't sure if I could keep doing it. And I was grateful for some of the time I had off. And I'm really, really grateful now to have come back and get the team back up front and be pushing myself each and every day to succeed as a racing driver.
Well, I can tell you that for those who've yet to watch a modern Trans Am race, I believe they air on, at least domestically here in the U.S., CBS Sports Network, but you can also find clips and whatnot on the good old interwebs. Just suggest to folks, if you've heard Daytona Prototype Internationals with with a Cadillac V8, or LMP2s with their higher revving Gibson V8s, or pick a GT car with a V8, you need to hear the Mustang that Chris drives, or pick some of the other models in TA1. That is a sound coming from a V8 that you really will not hear anywhere else in road racing. It is beauty. It is the specter of death. It is all kinds of things wrapped into 8 cylinders, just pumping out a tune. It's it's just glory. There are some series, as folks probably know on my little podcast here, where I really love to bring you the sounds of those series, maybe some in-car, because at least they make me smile, so I assume they'll make some other folks smile. Trans Am is really one of those series where you can close your eyes and almost be as happy as opening your eyes and watching, because the sounds are just glorious. So happy for you, my man. Happy that you started off the season with a quality podium in round 2 there in Sebring, but even more hoping that we keep having really great reasons to speak about Trans Am as we hope and believe it's going to come back. So we would have IMSA, World Challenge, and Trans Am as 3 pillars, which we had for so many years, but 3 pillars of sports car racing in the U.S. that really serve everyone's needs.
Yeah, no, for sure, Marshall, and I'm excited. We'll be at Atlanta in 3 weeks, and the tour is going to be making some pretty regular stops. You can follow us. I'm on Chris Dyson 16 on Twitter, and we post regular updates, and we're going to be sharing lots of media. Christopher Dyson on Instagram. And we'll just be trying to share as much of that great media goodness and trying to bring this into more lives, Marshall, because I think Trans Am is good for everyone.
Amen to that. And who knows, maybe our next call for Inside the Sports Car Paddock, maybe we'll just tell some old Dyson GTP Day stories, or you and I can just wax on about the things we love about the sport with no particular agenda in mind. So, my friend, thank you as always for finding some time, and I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.
It's always a pleasure, Marsh. Thanks.
At Donington Park for the British GT Championship Media Day, a frigid day in the Midlands of England. Cars outside you can hear is the British Formula 3 Championship going round and round and round. But here in the relative quiet, the media centre, with Rob Bell, the elder, he would like to think more attractive of the Bell brothers. And Rob, I can see by your overalls, either you've been signed for Ferrari or you're with Valve Racing in the magnificent McLaren 720S GT3.
Yeah, well, it's no surprise it's the latter. It's fantastic. It's fantastic to be back, actually. We obviously I've been with Balf, in and around Balf, for a few years now, and it's a great environment to be in. And last year didn't go quite to script, and the programme was cut short, and probably for the right reasons. But we're back with a shiny new toy, all full of beans, all excited and ready to go.
Talk at a moment, and I think that's the main reason to talk to you about the new car, because you know probably more about that new car than any other person alive at the moment. We've got a full season entry list in the UK, 38 cars. It's 15, and I think it's eventually going to be 16 GT3 cars. That's going to be some racing, isn't it? Particularly because you've got that two-class system, and traffic comes into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a double-edged sword, obviously. Traffic, etc., big grids, and it will cause problems during the year, but ultimately that's what it's all about. That's what GT racing's all about, you know. You're looking ahead, you're looking behind, you've got to be aware, and it is a fantastic grid, actually, and to have such strength again, probably stronger than last year, I would have thought, in terms of depth and personnel doing it, and we've got quite a few new cars,
yes.
Either Evo kits or actual brand new cars. So I would say it's actually probably certainly the most exciting British GT I've been a part of by a country mile, and I can't remember a sort of more interesting one for a good number of years.
Final question on that part of it. A couple of good old chats down in the pit lane with the GT3 teams in particular, talking about the new Bentley being here for the first time. We've got the new Aston Martin here for the first time, as well as the McLaren, but in particular those two cars I mentioned. Their predecessors, very much power cars, quick in a straight line, weren't aero cars in the same way that the McLaren 650S was, and the 720 most certainly is. But that's going to mean it's altogether closer again, isn't it? You're not here talking about things that can greyhound away on the straight. They're going to make their pace in the same way that McLaren does in the corners. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, time will tell with that one, because what gets announced pre-season isn't necessarily what we see on track always. So I think people talked about the Bentley being a power car, but actually, I remember following it at Bathurst last year or the year before, and thinking, wow, that's got some aero. So actually, it's let's wait and see with that one. But ultimately, again, you've got lots of different brands in there, so you are going to have some tracks that suit others better, and you've got to wait for your day. But I think you're right. I think you'll go, certainly now where you're going to go to most tracks and you've all got a similar sort of way of achieving the lap time, which will mean potentially more door-to-door action, a bit more elbows out. We've got some tight tracks here. We've got Alton Park first, which is always a harem scarum weekend. You check, you've got all your body parts after that when you get home, which is a real challenge. It's great, but I think you're right. I think you're going to see really, really close racing.
Let's talk about the new McLaren, because that's why you're here. Factory driver for McLaren again. You've been tasked with much of the development work on that car. We've seen it race just once at the Golf 12 Hours so far. That was impressive. It led well until, hour 9 or 10? It was late on the race.
Yeah, I wasn't there. My wife was due to give birth on that day.
That's very inconsiderate.
Yeah, terrible planning. And actually, Alice actually came 15 days late on New Year's Eve, so I could have done the race, couldn't I? But anyway, I'm not saying that too loud.
How very fatherly of you.
I'm not saying that too loud. We'll edit that later. So I wasn't actually there, but I more or less watched the whole race, and the way it unfolded was a bit of a fairy story, really, in terms of the project's been done in such a compact way that, and not only the project but the whole building of a division of McLaren, it's all come together quickly, and to see it actually perform as it did was really cool, cool. And as you say, it didn't quite end up as we would have wanted it, but I think there was a really daft thing that went wrong on the car. Nothing to worry about, sort of a thing where 50 pence washer or whatever it was, I can't remember, but ultimately it was great to watch. It really was. Well, we were mixing it with the big boys straight away, and I thought that was fantastic. Sort of sat at home watching, in one respect thinking, oh, that's fantastic, and another thinking, oh, well, I wish I was in it. But yeah, it was brilliant.
We've not seen much of you internationally because you've been involved in the development of the new car. Tell us a little bit about just what's been involved from, well, it coming off a CAD screen really to the point where you've had something that you can take around and give initial feedback for, the development that inevitably comes with that. Tell us a little bit about how much of your time has been dedicated to that project.
Yeah, quite a lot. So last year, obviously 2018, the beginning of the year was quite slow because I didn't have a race program. Obviously we didn't have anything to race, and I suppose the bottom line is we have got a strong road car to start from. It does stem from road car DNA. The tub's the same, so ultimately you've got everything where you want it. Engine in the right place, in my opinion. And so you start from the framework, and then obviously you've got targets to meet, BOP, various standards and bits and bobs, new safety rules, and actually it's that sort of thing that when you're involved in the whole program from the beginning, from the frame up, you then see how much work goes into it, and it's not all about what ratio we're going to have here, it's about actually the roll cage and the new seat regulations, and okay, that's fine, now we need movable pedals. Right, we've not done that before, so it's it's the small things like that, and being involved in the beginning, it was sort of the first 2 months or so, it's like, right, go to the factory, sit in a frame on a makeshift seat, tell us where you want this switch, which ultimately is not what we all want to be doing. We just want to be at racetracks, but actually it's a really important process. So to answer your question, we did all of that initially, and then it ramped up really quickly. We went testing, and testing was pretty intense. Did a lot of Ks in 2 test cars, and you soon you soon learn what's important, what's not. You've got then where do you aim for your sort of BOP window? That's a really important decision, and it started to build a picture early doors of, well, do you know what? I think we've got quite a solid base here, and then obviously, you know, you go home at the weekend, you're not racing, so that's one thing, but to be a part of that is actually pretty special.
Yeah.
Not just me in this programme, or we've got Joe and Ben as well, who were in the programme as well, but any DT, Aston, and, you know, any driver who's done that, and then that car goes and races.
And has success.
And has success is pretty cool. And, you know, I was involved in the 650 project on the 12C, which was a different sort of kettle of fish, in a different environment. But I have brought that knowledge forward as well. So, you know, it's a really privileged place to be. And the fact that I wasn't racing was sort of fine because I knew what was coming.
Yeah, I get that completely.
Yeah, that's been cool.
It's difficult in an era of BOP with GT3, obviously, to sometimes get that kind of yardstick. It tends to be spoken about in kind of slightly flowery terms, but you're right, you've been through each of the 3 iterations of GT3 McLaren through 2 very different organisations. It was clear that the 650S was a big step from the 12C, and, you know, lest we forget, was the most successful GT3 car in a single year with championship wins and big race wins.
Yeah.
Tell me, how big you've got the Blancpain watch? He's got the Blancpain watch. I thought he was trying to tell me time was up, but no, he just showed me his championship win watch. How big a step this time? And where?
I think what you do is you learn from everything you do, whether, you know, successes, mistakes, everything, and you just go forward, don't you, ultimately, and the road car iterations have got more refined and better, and I think the realisation in my head is, as you look at it, as you get a bit older, it's you have to understand what your product is out there to do.
Yeah.
Is it out there to win every race it ever goes in? Well, of course, but that kind of goes without saying. That's what you want to do, but in reality, what your product's out there to do is to please the customers who buy it, and they've got to get in it and enjoy driving it, and they've got to get in it and it keeps going round and round and round without any problems, and then you've got to have the support, because there will be a few problems. So when there is an issue, then you've got to have that side of things, and, you know, you just learn to see a bigger picture as you get a bit older. And
let's use the phrase more experienced.
Yeah.
The older bit depresses me a bit.
Yes. So as I've got more experienced,
good man.
You just see the bigger picture, and I think that goes with the whole project. And you know, if you look at the 12C, I still say it was a good car for the consideration that it was McLaren's first road car, you know, mass production, or if you want to call it that. Production car, and we made a race car of it, and then, you know, it was a great car. The 650 was a step forward, and the 720 will be the same, because we are very much know what we're aiming for, and we very much know the end goal, and we're very, very keen to make sure we've ticked off more boxes and keep you know, customers happy, and ultimately win races. But you know, we think we've made a step forward just on quite a few aspects of it, and going forward, the McLaren sort of GT, McLaren Motorsport sort of GT cars that we're going to build in the future, it's bright, you know, it's just constantly evolving, constantly going forward, and with a change of sort of structure and the way it's all panned out, the future has got stability and a real base, and, you know, something to be proud to be a part of.
And more to come in your era. We know that already. I'm not going to ask you to confirm it, because that's not appropriate, but I'll say for the tape that it's pretty clear that McLaren are involved in development of another new GT car for another class of racing. And we'll wait and let the guys at Woking decide when they're going to announce that. It must be a buzz to be in the position you're now in. I mean, it's a hard road as a professional race driver, and a harder road still to get to the point where you're a factory driver. But now that's a different step again here. You're not just a factory driver, you're the factory development driver as well as a race driver.
Yeah, I suppose. The first thing I think of when you say that is, and you've got to cling on to it because it's great, and there's a million people all knocking on the door, but it's, like I said before, it's a privilege to be a part of it all, and you know, as you've alluded to, we have got plans for the future, and you know, I want to be a part of it because it's been great so far, and something I do enjoy. I mean, at the end of the day, racing it's in your blood, isn't it? You know, you don't have to be driving a car. You know, you're here, I'm here. We're all. It's just in the blood, and it's fantastic. And we want to go racing, but I think again, as you get more experienced, you just see that it's great, and it's good to have a different string to your bow. And the development side of things is really, really good. I really enjoy it, and yeah, so to be part of it. It's great, and it's just a privilege to be here doing it.
Freezing cold here at Donington Park, and a man that knows all about cold weather. It's great to see you at Donington Park, Scott Maxwell. Scott, you're here with a new programme for the British GT Championship for 2019 with Multimatic Motorsports and a pair of Ford Mustang GT4s plus a customer car. We're not used to seeing the big banger US-based cars here. Tell us a little bit about what the program is all about.
Well, the end goal is obviously to sell more of these GT4s and the Mustang in general to the European and British market. I think the GT4 program for sure is overdue over here. I think we probably should have tried hitting it a couple of years ago, but you know, better late than never. So we're here with a two-car program, and as you said, we have a customer car as well. So, and we're here for the full series, not just a one-off appearance, which also helps. And I think they're just going to try to build a presence here in Great Britain and in Europe over the course of the year, and hopefully this time next year we'll have a bunch of customers.
You're here today with one of the, we'll call it a factory car. It doesn't quite work like that, but with young Seb Braun alongside you, a name with Multimatic history with his dad. Tell us a little bit about how Seb's coming along.
Well, you know, honestly, I just met him this morning. I've heard incredible rave reviews about him, and so far he hasn't disappointed. He's 17, so I joked with him this morning. I've raced here once at Donington in 1998, and he wasn't even born. So, and I know Andy a little, and talked to Andy at length this morning. So all good. The kid's a great driver. Everyone's going, "Oh, what are you going to teach him?" I'm sort of looking at it the other way around because I'm going to tracks I've really never been to or been to a long time ago. So I can help him a bit with the car, but he's a fast learner obviously, and he's going to help me with the tracks. And I think and we're the same size, which is awesome as long as he stops growing, stops eating. So it's pretty rare for me to have a teammate my size. So that it's so far so good, and he's very quick. So I'm hoping he's going to do the heavy lifting, and I can just take some of his glory.
Take the credit.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I plan to do. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the car. You've been around this car from its inception, and for that matter, the previous iteration of Mustang and GT4. Tell us a little bit about how the GT4 products evolved. Tell us about this car now, and also how you see it against some of the competition you've seen today here, because it's a competition depth in the UK this year.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of the reason Multimatic decided on this series specifically, because everyone said it's the toughest of all the European series, which probably makes it one of the toughest, if not the toughest in the world. I think IMSA is very strong as well. So yeah, I've been around most of the Multimatic Mustang projects for the last 20 years or so, but the last 2 or 3, in different classes, Grand Sport or whatever, but the GT4 is the latest one. I guess this is really year 3, and right from the get-go, I mean, we had a good solid base and a ton of experience with the cars, so with GT4 you can be a little more aggressive with aero and whatnot. We, right from the start, we tried to develop a car. You have to think the end goal and the customer more than, what Scott Maxwell wants or Billy Johnson wants. It might be a little different than what a gentleman racer wants or even a team is after to attract customers. So I think we've done a pretty good job. Most people that drive find it very easy to drive, very forgiving. and obviously it's very competitive because it's winning. Won a bunch of races last year in customer hands, and that's ultimately what we want to see. Ford Performance and Multimatic want to see customers win way more than we want to see even our own cars. Even though it's hard as a driver in one of those cars to say that we all know that's the end goal. So it's evolved a little over the last couple of years, but not. With the BOP, you come out and you present a car, and you got to be careful what you're presenting, because if they check all the boxes and lock it in, that's the car.
Yeah.
So they do a great job, the SRO and FIA and all those people, of now making sure that it's hard to fall outside of that window. You might initially, like we've seen a few times where a car comes out in the first race, dominates, but you don't see it last for very long. So we've built a car that I think, like I say, a varying degree of driver skill can make go quite quickly, and more importantly can drive 30, 40, 50 laps at a consistent pace and be competitive. And a lot of times that's what you want to do. I mean, 1 or 2 flying laps is great, but when you get a Pro-Am combination, it's really hard for an amateur to do that, and he's not expected to do that. So he wants a car that he can just pound out the laps and have a good time and not be over-driving, and when things go a little wrong, he can catch it. So I think we've delivered a car like that, and now we just got to, get it over here a little more presentable in terms of support and all that. And I think Ford will do that, and Multimatic will do that.
It's about raising awareness, and I guess compared to just about any other Mustang product you've been involved with in that 20 years, what you've got now is an advantage that this is now a global car. We are seeing these cars on the roads of the UK. It was a very unusual sight to the previous iteration of Mustang. What are you hearing in terms of the level of recognition for people you're talking to about the program? I'm sure there are potential customers coming along.
We've, and I've heard this for over a year now, and I think that's what we're addressing with this program right here is the first example of that. I think there's been a lot of interest for a while, but when you're a guy shopping around for cars, there's a lot of great manufacturer competitors. You got Porsche and Audi and BMW, all these different companies that are pumping out very good cars as well. The difference being in Europe, they're deep on their support, and we haven't had that traditionally over here. So I think people have been eager to go the Mustang route, but there's no one to back it up in terms of race support and parts and all that. Ford are taking that leap now, and I think that'll attract the customers. There's stuff going on down in Australia and Europe now. North America obviously is established. I think that's really the only difference from a year ago or 2 years ago is now Ford are backing it up, so that people will now go, okay, if I take a corner off my car or I have a technical problem, there's somebody there at track to help me out, and that's I think the difference.
And that's a great thing to have that customer car sharing a garage here, but it won't be, I'm sure, for the rest of the season, that you'll be able to prove it not just on track, but in the support that they're seeing in the tracks as well.
Yeah, and I think for a customer sometimes, and it happens even in IMPS or Pirelli sometimes when the image is a factory team comes in, I don't have the same equipment. And fortunately, we've proven, especially in North America, where we have some really strong teams running our product, that it is the same car. You are getting the same car, and if something goes wrong, they're right there. Multimatic's not going to run a factory program over here for years and years. They'd much rather see 6-8 privateers running their cars, and I think that will happen. But something has to kickstart it, and this is the kickstart.
All you're going to do is go out and win.
Well, hopefully, or our customer wins and we're right behind them. But it's going to be difficult. I'm no illusions. We're going to dominate. I think is a very, as we've talked about already, a very competitive field. I think we can be one of those guys that can win races, and we'll just have to see. It's a lottery out there with these series.
Wish you success, and I wish you some slightly less Canadian weather.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Cheers.
Okay.
And that was inside the sports car paddock, this being March 11th. And yeah, boy, can't wait to get out of Sebring week and see who we happen to ring up or sit down with and capture for the next episode. I don't know, sneaking suspicion. Might be Sebring related, might be WEC, might be IMSA, who knows, but might even be World Challenge, which is just at St. Petersburg. So anyways, that's the fun part for me with this new show. We don't exactly know who we're going to speak with and bring to you with this interview feature format, but it's kind of fun, and we also get thoughts from y'all as for who we should dial up and bring to you. So looking forward to that next week, and also if you get a chance, check out Marshall Pruett Podcast autosport.com. It's brand new. It's alive. I think we have most of the bugs ironed out, but if not, please drop me a note. Let me know. If you see a typo somewhere or some dumb thing I might have come up with, let me know. We'll get that fixed. But yeah, brand new site, MarshallPruettPodcast.com. Everything we've ever posted. We're almost at 500 episodes now. Yeah, wow. Check it out, hopefully. And if you're not a subscriber, we have a big old red button that says subscribe. And you can figure out whatever ways that make sense to you, either streaming this, downloading it, and yeah, join the little family here. And looking forward to getting to that 500th episode and motoring on to, who knows, 1,000. So we're coming up on our 3-year anniversary here in May, and I don't even know what we're going to do. It's another thing. Give me an idea. I mean, this is very much your podcast and very much driven by what you all happen to like or think. And, yeah, here we go. Almost at 500. Well, all right. I'm Marshall Pruett. This is the Marshall Pruett Podcast, presented to you by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers. Thank you for listening.